price of power. It was a bright, almost blindingly clear morning when Samuel stood by the window of his high-rise office, staring out at the city below. The bustling streets, the glint of car windows under the sun, the distant hum of traffic, it all felt distant, almost like he was looking at a painting, a life he no longer felt connected to. Samuel had once been a simple man. Just a few years ago, he had lived in a small apartment, worked a 9-to-5 job, and had no dreams of grandeur. But things had changed. Fast. He had always been a man of ambition. But ambition, as he would learn, had a price. He remembered the day the offer came, an invitation from the most powerful corporation in the city. The CEO had offered him a position with an impressive salary, a corner office, and the chance to climb higher than he had ever imagined. Just one thing, the CEO had said, "There are no limits here, Samuel. But in this world, power doesn't come without sacrifices. Are you ready?" Samuel had taken the offer without hesitation. Who could resist? The money, the respect, the power, it was everything he had ever wanted. And for a while, it was perfect. He bought a bigger house, took trips to places he'd once only dreamed of, and made connections with people who could open doors to even more opportunities. But the price of power, Samuel quickly realized, wasn't just about money. It was the cost of losing himself. The long hours at work, the constant pressure, the betrayals hidden behind friendly smiles, it all started to weigh on him. His relationships with family and friends began to fade. He stopped calling his sister. His friends from the past became strangers. He was too busy. Too tired. Too focused on his rise. But what really stung was the day he received the phone call from his mother. She was in the hospital, her voice weak and frail. "Samuel," she had whispered, "I'm not sure how much longer I have. I wish you were here." It was the first time in years he'd felt the pain of truly missing someone. He promised her he'd come. But the next morning, he got an urgent call from the CEO, something important, something only he could handle. Samuel was torn. His mother needed him, but the job was everything. After a few minutes of hesitation, he made the decision that would change everything. He stayed at work. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. His mother passed away quietly, and Samuel never had the chance to say goodbye. His guilt gnawed at him, but he didn't allow himself to feel it for long. The deal he had been working on was now one of the most talked about corporate wins in the city. People praised him, but the applause felt hollow. The price of power had claimed another part of him, the part that used to care. It wasn't until one late evening, while reviewing some financial reports in his office, that he received a message. It was from an old friend, a man named Peter who had always warned him about the dangers of ambition. "Samuel," the message read, "I saw you at the gala last week. You've changed. You've forgotten what's important. I used to look up to you. But now I don't recognize you." Samuel stared at the screen, his hand trembling slightly. The message hit harder than he expected. He had become someone he barely recognized, someone Peter couldn't even look up to anymore. The next morning, as he walked into the office, Samuel realized something had shifted. There was a strange emptiness in him, a void that all the money, the promotions, and the fancy parties couldn't fill. For the first time in a long while, he questioned everything. "Power isn't just about what you have," he whispered to himself as he sat at his desk, staring out at the city once again. "It's about who you become in the process. And if you lose yourself along the way, is it really worth it?" But even as the thought lingered, he knew there was no turning back. The price of power had already been paid. And yet, deep inside, something told him that this story wasn't over. Something told him that the real test was just beginning. Would he continue to chase after power, or was it time to find a way back to who he once was? Samuel couldn't shake the thought that had settled in his mind. Was it really worth it, He had everything that most people would kill for: wealth, prestige, and influence, but at what cost? His heart felt like a distant, forgotten part of him, buried under layers of corporate meetings and deadlines. That evening, he sat alone in his office long after everyone had left. The city lights flickered outside, casting a soft glow against the glass walls of his sleek, cold office. He scrolled through old pictures on his phone: vacations with friends, birthday parties, moments of genuine laughter. It all felt so distant now, like a life he no longer had access to. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. He looked up, startled, but then smiled faintly as his assistant, Clara, stepped inside. Clara had been with him for years, always reliable, always professional. She had seen his transformation over time, but never once commented on it. "Is everything okay, Mr. Samuel?" she asked, her voice soft but concerned. He sighed deeply, staring out at the skyline. "I don't know anymore, Clara. I thought I had it all figured out. But I think I've lost something important." Clara paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "It's hard, isn't it? The climb, the constant push to be the best. But I've seen you, Samuel. You're more than just this job. You were once the guy who helped people, who cared about things other than profit and performance." Samuel looked at her, his eyes a mix of surprise and sorrow. "You think I've changed that much?" She nodded, her gaze kind. "I do. But it's not too late. You can still find your way back." Samuel didn't respond right away. He didn't know what to say. It felt too complicated, too entangled in the web of decisions he had made. But Clara's words lingered with him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few weeks, Samuel began to take small steps to rediscover himself. He started by reconnecting with people from his past. He called his sister, who was happy but surprised to hear from him. They spoke for hours, reminiscing about old times and sharing updates. He visited his old friends, people who had once been his support system, before the corporate world took him away. The more he spoke to them, the more he realized that he had abandoned a part of himself in the pursuit of success. He had become a man he didn't recognize, a man driven by ambition but disconnected from the things that truly mattered. One afternoon, while on a walk through the park, his first in months, Samuel ran into Peter, the friend who had sent him that blunt message. Peter looked older, but still had the same warmth in his eyes. "I see you're still breathing, Samuel," Peter said, his tone light but with a touch of sincerity. "I was starting to wonder if you'd become a ghost, just like the others." Samuel chuckled, but it was empty, lacking the usual confidence. "Yeah, I've been lost in the race, I guess." "You're not the only one," Peter said with a shrug. "But it doesn't have to be like this forever. The trick is knowing when to stop, when to step back and remember what you've forgotten." Samuel felt a pang in his chest. He had been so caught up in moving forward, in the pursuit of more, that he had neglected the simplest things like family, real friends, and even himself. "I don't know if I can go back, Peter," Samuel admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've built so much. What if I'm too far gone?" Peter stopped walking and turned to face him. "It's never too late, Samuel. You may have lost some things, but there's always a way back. You have to decide who you want to be, not just what you want to achieve. Power, in the end, is nothing without people to share it with, or a purpose to give it meaning." The words struck Samuel hard. He had spent years defining himself by his success, by the size of his paycheck and the power he wielded at work. But now, he realized that those things, while important in their own right, could not fill the void he felt inside. "I'll try," Samuel said, his voice quieter now, but with more resolve. "But I have to ask myself, what am I really chasing anymore?" Peter smiled softly. "That's the question. And once you figure it out, you'll know if it's still worth the cost. As the days passed, Samoa took more time for himself. He reconnected with his mother's memory, finding comfort in the small things she had once taught him. He started visiting the hospital, not as the high-powered executive, but as the son who could finally be present for the people who mattered. Slowly, he began to withdraw from the corporate grind. It wasn't easy. The pressure to keep climbing, to keep winning, was always there, whispering at the back of his mind. But with each day, the noise grew quieter. Samoa realized that the price of power was not in the money he had earned or the influence he had gained. The true cost was in the parts of himself he had sacrificed to get there. Now, as he moved forward, he would need to rebuild, starting with his own heart. But as he looked out over the city from his office window once again, he couldn't help but wonder how many more people like him were out there, chasing the same thing, paying the same price. The real question, it seemed, was whether it was possible to change the course of the climb without losing everything along the way. And for the first time in years, Samoa wasn't sure what the answer was. But he was ready to find out. The price of power had been steep, but perhaps, just perhaps, the price of redemption might be worth it. But Samoa's journey was just beginning. As the days went by, Samoa felt the weight of his decisions bearing down on him. He had begun to make subtle changes, walking away from the pressures of the office more often, taking time to enjoy simple moments with the people he had long neglected. Yet, the more he pulled away, the more the world around him seemed to push back. Colleagues who had once been his allies now looked at him with a mixture of confusion and doubt. He wasn't the same Samoa they had known. He wasn't the hungry, ambitious man who would sacrifice anything for success. And in their eyes, that made him weak. One afternoon, as he walked through the park near his office, now a place he frequented whenever the stress became too much, he bumped into Clara. She was out on her lunch break, her usual brisk pace replaced with a more relaxed stride. "You're looking better," she remarked with a smile. "Taking some time for yourself, I see." Samoa smiled back, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm trying to," he said. "It's not easy to step back, but I think I need to." Clara nodded, understanding more than Samoa realized. "The pressure of it all can drown you. But you're doing the right thing. It's okay to not have all the answers. But maybe you'll find them if you give yourself space to breathe." Her words resonated with him, but they also left him with a deeper question: what was he really searching for? That night, after another long day at the office, Samoa sat on his balcony, the lights of the city stretching out before him. He thought about the words Peter had said, "It's never too late, star." But what if it was? What if he had already crossed a line, one he could never come back from? What if all his efforts to change were just futile attempts to escape a reality he had created for himself? His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it, seeing an incoming call from his old friend, David. They hadn't spoken in months. Samoa had distanced himself from most of his friends, focusing solely on his work and the climb up the corporate ladder. But something told him that this call was important. "Hello." Samoa answered, his voice more tired than he intended. "Samoa," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been hearing things. I heard about your promotion, congratulations, man. But is everything okay? You've been quiet lately." Samoa sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've just been busy. You know how it is." David paused, sensing that there was more. "Yeah, but I also know you, Samoa. You've always been about more than just the work. What's going on? I can tell something's different." For a moment, Samoa wanted to brush it off, to tell David everything was fine. But then he remembered what he was trying to find, the truth. He had been hiding from it for so long, behind the walls of success and responsibility. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "I don't know anymore, David," Samoa admitted, his voice raw. I've spent so many years chasing power, chasing success. And now that I've got it, I feel empty. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm not sure who I am. There was silence on the other end of the line. For a few moments, Samuel thought David had hung up. But then his voice came through, softer this time. I've been there, man. I've been there. And I get it. You're not the only one who's felt lost after all this chasing. But Samuel, what's the point of all this power if you lose yourself in the process? Power, money, it doesn't change what's inside. It doesn't fix the part of you that feels empty. You've got to look inside yourself. You've got to ask what you really want. What kind of man you want to be. Because the chase, it never ends. Samuel closed his eyes, the weight of David's words sinking in. He had been so obsessed with the race, with winning, that he had forgotten to stop and ask himself why he was running in the first place. Thank you, David, Samuel said softly. I think I've been running away from something for too long. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm going to try. David's voice was warm. You'll find your way, Samuel. Just don't wait too long. Life doesn't wait for anyone. The call ended, but Samuel sat there for a long time, his phone still in his hand. He felt a sense of clarity, as though a fog had lifted, but he also knew that the path ahead would not be easy. He had to rebuild what he had lost, his connection to himself, to the people he loved, and to the world he had shut out in his pursuit of success. The next day, Samuel made a decision. He walked into his office early, before anyone else had arrived, and sat down at his desk. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the crushing pressure of the job. He opened his email and drafted a message to the CEO, a request to step back, to focus on something more meaningful. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew there would be consequences. But he also knew that if he didn't do it now, he might lose himself forever. He hit send. The weight that had been on his shoulders for so long seemed to lift just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Samuel knew that the road ahead was uncertain. The price of power had already been paid, and the cost had been steep. But there was still time to change, to redefine who he was and what truly mattered. And for the first time in a long time, Samuel was ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, the hardest part of finding yourself isn't the search, it's the courage to begin again. The days following Samuel's decision were filled with uncertainty. He had sent the email to the CEO, requesting a break from his high-pressure role, but he hadn't received a response yet. The silence was deafening. The weight of his choices hung over him, but there was a small part of him, just a tiny, flickering part, that felt hope. He had chosen to take control of his life again, and that alone was a victory. That weekend, he drove to the quiet countryside, seeking solace away from the relentless buzz of the city. His thoughts raced, but the peacefulness of the rolling hills and green pastures soothed his mind. He remembered the simpler days, when he would go on long drives with friends, or sit in a cozy cafe with no agenda but to enjoy the moment. But the nagging question still lingered. Had he made the right choice? The stillness around him was a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside. He was used to the chaos, the constant rush to meet expectations, the adrenaline of making deals and closing big projects. But now that he had stepped back from it all, the silence felt like both a gift and a challenge. He had to rebuild, but how? As he walked through a nearby village that afternoon, Samuel passed a small, family-run bookstore. The quaint little shop stood in stark contrast to the towering glass structures in the city where he had spent so much of his time. It was simple, unassuming, and full of stories waiting to be discovered. On impulse, he stepped inside. The smell of paper and ink filled the air, and as he wandered through the aisles, he felt a deep sense of nostalgia. Books had once been his escape. They were windows to different worlds, places where ambition wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by the richness of experience and the depth of character. As he turned the pages of an old biography on a man who had risen from nothing to change the world, Samuel couldn't help but draw parallels to his own life. This man had achieved greatness, but it wasn't the type of greatness that required sacrificing everything he loved. This man's power was rooted in purpose, in helping others, in creating something that would last long after he was gone. He bought a book and sat at a small table by the window, sipping coffee as the world outside continued its busy march forward. For the first time in years, Samuel felt like he had all the time in the world. Over the next few days, Samuel began to reevaluate his priorities. He didn't need to be the richest or most powerful man in the room anymore. What he needed was peace, peace with himself, peace with his past, and peace with the people he had hurt along the way. He reached out to his estranged colleagues and friends, sending heartfelt messages, acknowledging his mistakes, and offering a chance to rebuild the trust he had lost. The response was mixed. Some people were hesitant, unsure if Samuel had truly changed. Others, however, welcomed his efforts, understanding that growth often came from the most unexpected places. Clara was one of those who had always believed in him. When they spoke on the phone, she was as kind and supportive as ever. "Samuel, you don't have to be perfect," she told him one evening. "You just have to be real. And that's enough." But it wasn't just his professional life that needed mending. Samuel began visiting his mother's grave more often, bringing flowers and sitting with her in silence. He talked to her as if she were still there, telling her about his struggles, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. It was as if, in those quiet moments, he was finally letting go of the guilt that had weighed him down for so long. A month passed, and Samuel didn't hear back from the CEO. He began to wonder if his request for a break had been ignored, or worse, if it had been rejected. But then, one rainy morning, as he sat on the balcony of his apartment watching the city come to life, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the CEO's assistant, asking if he could come in for a meeting the next day. Samuel's heart raced. Asterisk, was this it? Was he about to face the consequences of his decision? Asterisk. The next morning, he walked into the office with a mix of anxiety and resolve. The familiar surroundings, the polished floors, the gleaming glass walls, felt almost foreign to him now. He had changed. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to go back to the life he had left behind. The CEO's office door was open, and Samuel stepped inside, greeted by the sharp, calculating eyes of his boss. The CEO sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Samuel," the CEO said coolly, "I've reviewed your request. I must admit, I was surprised. You've been one of our top performers. Your ambition has been a driving force behind our success. But I respect your decision to step back. You're allowed to take time off, but we need someone in your position. Someone who can keep pushing us forward." Samuel swallowed, his mind racing. "I understand. I've been thinking a lot about what I truly want. And I'm not sure that the endless chase is for me anymore. I'm willing to step down, but I also want to explore other ways I can contribute. Maybe not at the top, but in a way that feels more authentic." The CEO leaned back in his chair, studying Samuel. "You know, I didn't expect you to say that. But I'll be honest, there's a place here for someone like you, someone who understands that power isn't just about climbing higher. We'll work something out. Take your time, think it through. Let's see where this goes." Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but at the same time, a new understanding began to settle within him. The world was not black and white. Power didn't have to mean losing yourself in the process. He could still be part of something bigger, but on his own terms. As he left the CEO's office, he knew that the journey was far from over. There was no quick fix to the changes he sought. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace within himself. It wasn't about the title or the money anymore. It was about finding balance, finding purpose, and above all, finding who he truly was. And as the city's skyline loomed before him, Samuel smiled. He was ready for whatever came next. Because, in the end, the real power was in knowing when to stop chasing and start living. Samuel's transition was gradual, but each day brought him closer to the person he had once been, and perhaps even someone better. The weight of his choices, though still present, no longer consumed him. He had learned that true power wasn't in control or dominance, but in choice. The choice to live authentically, to pursue what mattered, and to leave behind the things that drained his soul. Weeks passed, and he spent his time both in the office and outside of it, finding a balance he had never thought possible. He started working on projects that aligned more with his values, helping charities, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and rebuilding the connections he had once abandoned. The man who had once been obsessed with climbing corporate ladders now found himself looking for ways to lift others up, to share what he had learned through his journey. One afternoon, he received a call from Peter. "Samuel," he said, "I've been hearing about your changes. I knew you could do it." Samuel chuckled softly. "It wasn't easy, Peter. But I think I finally figured out what matters." Peter's voice was warm and sincere. "It's not about what you've gained, Samuel. It's about what you've kept. The things that really make life worth living, family, friendship, purpose. And you've kept all of that even when it seemed lost." Samuel's eyes lingered on the sunset, the orange and pink hues reflecting off the buildings. The world around him seemed different now, more vibrant, more alive. The lessons he had learned weren't just intellectual, they had seeped into his soul, slowly but surely, changing him from the inside out. That evening, he sat down to write a letter. It wasn't an apology, though it held traces of regret. It was a letter to his mother, to thank her once again for the lessons she had instilled in him. And it was a letter to himself, a promise to never lose sight of what truly mattered again. By the time he finished the letter, the weight on his shoulders had fully lifted. He had let go of the guilt, the fear of being judged, and the idea that success had to look a certain way. Samuel understood now that the cost of power wasn't just in what you achieved, but in who you became in the process. Power gained at the expense of your soul was a hollow victory. As he closed his eyes that night, a peaceful sense of contentment washed over him. Samuel knew that life wasn't about climbing higher or achieving more, it was about balance, authenticity, and the courage to walk away when the cost became too great. The story of Samuel's journey was one of loss, redemption, and self-discovery. It was a reminder that true power isn't something you possess, it's something you choose, something you use to help others and to help yourself find peace in the chaos. The pursuit of power can sometimes blind us to what truly matters in life: love, connection, and personal fulfillment. True power isn't measured by wealth, status, or influence. It's measured by the choices we make, the integrity we maintain, and the relationships we nurture. The greatest strength lies in knowing when to stop chasing external success and start living a life that aligns with our true values. Power, when pursued at the expense of our humanity, leaves us empty. But power used for good, for purpose, and for others, brings fulfillment that no achievement can ever replace.